Hello, this is Carl Freund with Cambrian-AI Research, and I'm happy to have yet another interview with an interesting luminary from the industry, David Kanter of MLCommons. David, welcome to the show.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, you bet, you bet. So uh, some of our audience may not be familiar with MLCommons, even though they're familiar with MLPerf. Why don't you start talking about what is MLCommons, why does it exist, what's its role?
Yeah. So MLPerf, as many of you know, is sort of the industry standard benchmarks for training and inference. And we started it a few years ago. And it really was a very informal collaboration. Uh, a lot of things were done on, so-and-so's good word and a handshake. And one of the things that we knew we had to do from the start was to establish a formal entity, a not-for-profit foundation type to actually house the whole project. And so that's MLCommons. Now, the other thing is that, our focus is on being an open and global engineering consortium that focuses on ML. And benchmarks are just one aspect of our mission. There are other things that we are looking at to drive forward innovation in machine learning that actually, in many ways, as loath as I am to use a marketing term like synergize, do in fact synergize with benchmarks. So for example, one of our projects is building the world's largest open labeled speech data set. And well, why do we need this? And it turns out that we don't actually have sufficiently large open labeled speech data sets to train, a model in English. So if you go back a year ago, the largest open speech data set was a couple thousand hours. And we'll be releasing one that's 86,000 hours. It's 10 years of audio. And so that's good enough to train, I'm not going to say a production, speech to text model, but it gets you in the neighborhood of being able to get that level of accuracy. And so when we think about having a speech to text benchmark, having the data set is a necessary element, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's much broader than just MLPerf. But for MLPerf, you're probably in the neighborhood of like 80 participants. Not that you have 80 people submitting results, but you have like 80 members in
Oh,
the organization. How do you manage 80 cats? How do you herd 80 cats? What's,
uh,
what's the
well,
magic?
yeah, I mean, it's hard work. And, I think one of the things that we're really fortunate in is it is a large community. And in many cases, I think there is uh, kind of a firm agreement on principles. And that really helps to making decisions because ultimately, at the end of the day, we're focused on, as an organization, how do we grow the pie? How do we make the industry bigger? How can we make machine learning uh, from sort of take it from the Wright brother eras into the Dreamliner era, right? And that's sort of the broad picture, and everyone benefits from that. And so, benchmarks are one aspect of that because I think the value of a benchmark is as a barometer for progress, right? And it helps to get a shared perspective from sales and marketing and research and analysts and customers and vendors. And that shared understanding helps everyone move in the right direction. And so, that's something that everyone can subscribe to as being, valuable, not just for their company, but for the industry.
Interesting. That kind of reminds me of the early days of TPC and spec, where the workstations and then subsequently server vendors um, had to show up. Right? You couldn't really sell without showing people what your spec rates were and so forth. So that I applaud that result because I have been in the middle between vendors who claim the other vendors cheating and so forth. And then my answer is always the same, guys, just publish MLPerf. So why do you think, I mean, you've got some of the major players, right? NVIDIA, Google, Intel, they've been strong supporters and participants. Where's the rest of the guys?
Yeah. So, I think so first of all, we have active support from, startups from all different geographies. And that's something I'm very proud of. I think, one of the questions is about, how many startups are submitting. And so certainly we've actually had quite a bunch. Habana Labs, notably supported early on with the submission, Alibaba's group as well. And actually, one of the things that I've been just, phenomenally impressed by is some of the startups that have actually submitted research prototypes. And they aren't products. They're more like, maybe the FPGA implementation of a potential future chip. And to me, that's very impressive because I think, if we look at machine learning, one of the ways that it's different from, say, something like spec is I think the software footprint is dramatically bigger, right? If you think about uh, even a graphics benchmark, like playing a video game, right? You've got your graphics driver, which contains a compiler as well as a bunch of other things, right? You have all of that and ever so much more in a training benchmark, right? It's how do I go from PyTorch or TensorFlow on a potentially distributed system to run efficiently. And so I think one of the values that MLPerf brings is, we have both an agreed upon set of workloads and a set of rules that say, okay, this is what is reasonable and reflective of what customers do. And is it exactly what customers do? No. I mean, that's sort of impossible, right? To the extent that we want to be generic, we lose in specificity. But I would say, for example, our benchmarks for NLP, which use BERT, if you're doing any sort of conversational AI today is sort of the marketing buzzword, what you really mean is you are using some variant of BERT. Might be a little bit different than ours, but as a good heuristic, um, if you do well on our version of BERT, you're going to do well on most versions of BERT. Could it be off by 5 or 10%? Sure. But, it's definitely going to point you in the right direction.
And I think it also helps the design engineers know what's important,
Mm-hmm.
right? They can't just, throw a bunch of Macs at the problem and say, see, I've got an AI chip. During the design process, before, you start even considering your floor plan, you have to understand how well you will perform an MLPerf. Why? Because that's the reason people will buy your product, not because of MLPerf, but because of the applications that MLPerf represents. So I think that's a real contribution, I think, your organization and the teamwork across all the different competing vendors, which must be fun to manage. That really adds value. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you was about power.
Mm-hmm.
The inference market is not a market, right? It's not. It's tens of markets, maybe hundreds of markets, from
Mm-hmm.
microcontrollers and
Yeah.
automobiles to the supercomputers in the trunk of the automobile, and everything in between is inference. And so power envelope is a critical factor. We've talked before about power in benchmarks. Can you share with the audience what to expect from MLPerf in terms of being able to see some power performance numbers?
So, yeah, you're touching on one of my favorite topics. So I actually have a long sort of indirect history with power measurement. One of my good friends helped to lead the Spec Power SSJ 2008 benchmark. And I remember talking with him on the phone about it. And, I think back then, it was really sort of a horse race between Intel and AMD in the server space. And, one of the great things is that we were actually able to partner with Spec and use some of their infrastructure to start beginning to build our own power tooling. And one of the things that I'm actually really excited about is for the upcoming round of MLPerf inference in the results will come out in April of this year of 2021. We will have power measurement as an optional thing to do for our inference benchmarks. And now this is primarily targeted at, what I think of as data center and edge benchmarks. As you said, microcontrollers are an entirely different animal. In many cases, they're running totally different models, and they may not even have virtual memory and Linux running. So it's a very different environment. But we want to be able to measure, what is the power that you're actually using when you're, doing translation or doing object detection. And so I think that helps to provide a bit of normalization and guidance, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you care about performance and you also care about the total cost of ownership. And um, total cost of ownership is a funny characteristic because, well, it depends. Where are you buying your power? How good of a customer are you? What's your volume discount? Are you doing a big launch event with your partner? And there's so many things that, as folks in the industry, we know impact price, and it's very flexible. Um, However, it's really hard to cut a deal with Mother Nature, right? Physics is physics is physics, and voltage times current is power, and there's no real way around it. You can slide the scale a little bit and try to run your system in a freezer, but one of the things that we like about power measurement is that it is very unambiguous. And so that's a great metric to help provide a little bit of additional information in making the decision to buy, to build, and how to optimize.
Well, I sure look forward to that time as I'm working on our competitive landscape report. All the edge inference processors claim the best performance per watt, and there's no standard way of measuring that today.
Yeah.
Is it a chip level? Is it a system level? Right? Does it include what does it include? And so I think your efforts to standardize that will be greatly helpful to the industry. It would be gratefully helpful to me too. So thank you.
Yeah, my
So
pleasure. And the other thing I got to say is, I helped to lead the effort for probably the first year, and I've been able to pass the baton on to a wonderful team, and so it's really exciting to see something like this come to life. So
that's great. That's great. I know that the industry participants speak very highly of the process and the integrity of the MLCommons process. Do you have any closing thoughts about what to expect next year besides power that you'd like to see come to fruition for MLCommons?
yeah, so I mean, in the benchmark realm, we have a tiny ML, sort of more of an embedded microcontroller, as you say, kind of benchmark that's coming out, and that suite is new. So I'm very excited about what that team has done. Very proud of their work. Um, and so actually, for me, one of the things that's sort of funny is that kind of completes the vision. And on one hand, late last year, we had in our HPC submission, someone was using 10% of Fugaku, the world's #1 supercomputer, to run MLPerf. And that's megawatts. That's great. And it was a very exciting, interesting submission. And now we're getting down to milliwatts and microwatts. So we've kind of got the full range, and that's really exciting. I think as I look forward on the benchmarks, one of the things we're looking at is sort of replacing our initial generation of some of the benchmarks where, initially our process was kind of survey the community, figure out what works. And we've moved into a regime where we actually pull together advisory boards. And so some of the first fruits of this were our recommendation benchmark, DLRM, where, we got together leading industry and academic experts to help us make sure that our benchmarks were reflective of what really drives the industry and research forward. Because I think you had a very good point there, which is that a benchmark suite is not important in and of itself. It's important in that it is a reflection of reality. And so it is important for us to be a good reflection and not to allow the phenomenon of allowing the students to write the test, right? In a good teaching environment, the teacher should probably write the test. So that's on the benchmark side. And then, on the data side, we're hoping we've released our 10,000 hours of speech, 87,000 hours of speech to sort of select members to help, kick the tires. And we'd really like to get a full public release later this year. And, I think that covers like two of the main things. And then there's some other things we're doing to actually kind of make it easier to do experiments with machine learning that I'm also very excited about. But
What
we've got a
about
lot ahead of us.
what about automotive, David? You've talked to me about your thoughts on automotive. Is that an area you feel that you can add value as well?
Absolutely. The process of putting together an advisory board that I alluded to, our first one was in recommendation. We have one in automotive. And I should be clear that, I think from our perspective, we're sort of focused on the more ML heavy aspects of automotive. So something closer to, true autonomous control, right? And in,
Not just vision processing, right?
right, exactly. And the other thing is, like, if you look at ways that you can use ML in, say, automotive, right, you can do all sorts of things like lane keeping assist, and it turns out that's not a tremendously taxing workload, right? That's well within the range of feasibility today. And we're sort of aimed in many respects at driving the industry forward, all puns intended. And so we want to be a little bit more future looking. So that's something I'm excited about. And then we're also, we have an advisory board to revisit our so we have an advisory board on medical imaging, and that helped build our 3D medical imaging benchmark. And then we have one on vision processing that is not automotive and not medical. So I think those are a few of the things that we're, really looking forward to as ways to, help enrich the industry. And so hopefully we'll get to see the fruits of that this year. But I think one of the things that you said that certainly warms my heart to hear is people trust in the process. And I think that is one of the cores about how do I keep 80 of the closest, friendliest competitors on the planet on good terms. And part of it is having a solid and robust process. And there's always a balance between being nimble and having a maximally fair process, right? And I always like to think of MLCommons as having a bit more of the startup mentality, but we're growing into a more robust process as well. So
Excellent, excellent. Well, it sounds like you're going to have a really busy year. I know I appreciate all the work you do across the industry. And I look forward to seeing all the enhancements to MLPerf, especially the next release of inference benchmarks, which will certainly be exciting, especially if some of the newer players are able to get their act together from a hardware and software standpoint and resources to be able to participate. So good luck on that. Thank you very much for your time. Let's stay in touch. Always a pleasure to talk with you.
absolutely a pleasure. Thank you.
Take care now. Bye-bye. Stay well.
See ya.